Hi, welcome back. Before we introduce chapter 22 on the aorist indicative, I wanted to go over one last part of the verb system chart that we showed in the last instructional video. Notice that some of the forms here are shaded, and that's primarily what we call the liquid futures, which are listed here. I'm going to write this out. Liquid future. That's a completely different form of the future tense that you have not learned yet, and we will save for a later module, not this one. So you do not have to, so for any liquid verbs, remember the definition of a liquid verb is that the stem ends with a mu, a nu, a lambda, or a rho. So if you whether it's meno or balo, here the stem ends with a lambda. Iro, the stem ends with a rho, or any other liquid verb. You do not have to learn the future tenses yet. You will learn the future tenses later. Now let's go over chapter 22 and introduce the aorist active indicative forms. We will also learn the aorist middle forms, but not the passives. The passive form we will not learn. It's actually a separate paradigm that we will address in a future module. So we are learning the aorist active plus middle indicative forms and skipping the passive forms until later. Let me clear the board. So how do I form the aorist active indicative? In other words, if I have a word like balo, which is I am throwing. Well, if I wanted to say this in past time, I have two ways to do it. I've already learned the imperfect form, where I have the augment, I take the lexical stem with a double lambda, and I add the secondary active suffix endings. And when I do that, ebalon, that is I was throwing. But what if I want to say I threw or you threw? So not I was throwing, but I threw. Not you were throwing, but you threw. I cannot use the imperfect tense, but instead I use the aorist. And we'll be learning a particular kind of aorist form. We're learning the second aorist form. So we're learning the second aorist forms. This is the lesser used form, and the more commonly used form is the first aorist, which we will not learn this module, but we learn in the next module. So the first aorist is more frequently used. We're learning the less frequently used form, the second aorist. And we're going to use balo as our example. So if the imperfect form is formed by adding an augment to the lexical stem plus the secondary active suffixes, the second aorist is formed by not using the lexical stem, but instead using the verbal root. So for the aorist form, I add the augment to it, I add the verbal root, I add then the connecting vowel and the secondary active suffix, and to say I threw, it's ebalon. And notice that the spelling, it looks very similar to the imperfect tense, ebalon, I was throwing, but ebalon again has that double lambda. There's a double lambda here because it's using the lexical stem, whereas the aorist uses the verbal root, bal, as a way to form the aorist tense. So we're going to be using bal, the verbal root, all the way through. So if I want to say you threw, I'd have the augment, I have the verbal root, and then I have the second person's singular suffixes. We just went over the first person singular, we're going to do the second person singular, the third person singular, the first person plural, the second person plural, and the third person plural forms. And the second person singular forms is the epsilon or the augment plus the verbal root plus the secondary singular suffixes. And so abales is you through. Ebale, epsilon with the movable nu is he, she, it through. Abalamen is we through. Abalete is you all through. And ebalon is they through. And again, just like the imperfect, but here we're using the verbal root to form the aorist tense. The first person singular and third person plural forms are exactly the same. Context will tell you whether you translate ebalon as I through or they through. So let's say this paradigm together. All 1, 2, 3. Ebalon, ebalis, ebalen. Ebalamen, ebalete, ebalon. And that's the second aorist active forms. To do the second aorist middle forms, and I'm going to translate it, this as a middle intensive. So if I want to say I myself through, and as a middle form, the emphasis is on the subject of the sentence I, or you, or he, she, it, rather than on the verb. The way I would form it is, again, I would take the augment or epsilon, take the verbal root. So the aorist form always wants to use the verbal root, and then the connecting vowel plus the secondary middle passive suffixes. So if I wanted to say, sorry, I myself was throwing. If I wanted to do the imperfect middle, it would be ebalamen. This is the imperfect form, where I use the lexical stem with a double lambda to form the imperfect tense. But here I'm using the verbal root with a single lambda to form the second aorist middle form. And so it's the epsilon plus the verbal root plus the connecting vowel and the secondary middle passive suffix. So abalamen is I myself through. Ebal. Now look at the form here. You have the connecting vowel epsilon, and then you have the sigma sa, but you never see this form. The reason why is because we learned that the sigma does not like being sandwiched between two short vowels, and then you know your big 5 little 2 rules for vowel contraction. What happens when the epsilon and omicron come together? It forms an upsilon. And so the final form for you yourself through is ebalu. And let me clean this up here. That's better. And if I want to say he himself through or she herself through, again, I'm doing the middle translation, the middle intensive. It's ebaleta. We ourselves through, ebalameta. You yourselves through, ebaleste. And they themselves through, balanta. So let's say this paradigm altogether. This is the second aorist middle indicative forms. Ebalamen, ebalu, ebalata, ebalamata, ebalaste, ebalanta. In this next chart, it's just a friendly reminder, please review. This is something you should have already learned from Greek 1, the present, future, and imperfect forms for the verb ami, which is I am. Now let's compare this with the next chart. This is the verb ginomai, which means I become. This is just to show a nice contrast with the verb ami, which is I am. So this is ami is translated I am. Here this is translated I become. Notice that we had, this is the present tense form, the future tense form. Please memorize these. This is part of your vocabulary. And here's the aorist form. Now, does I become have an imperfect form? It does. It does have an imperfect form, but it's not frequently used. You can say I was becoming. Take the augment, take the lexical stem, gin, na main, and that's I was becoming. But notice here, the verbal root for ginomai is gen, and so to form the aorist tense, the second aorist, I don't say aginomain here for the imperfect, which is I was becoming. To say I became, I say agenomain with an epsilon, with this gen, with an epsilon as or the verbal root as my stem. So the forms for I became, you became, he, she, it became, etc. is agenomain, agenu, agenita, egenomata, egeneste, egenanta. So please memorize this as part of your vocabulary. The present, the future, the aorist forms for ginomai, and be able to also distinguish the aorist form from the imperfect form, which looks exactly the same, except the imperfect uses the lexical stem and the aorist uses the verbal root. And that concludes our module and chapter 22.